Welcome to the Bucher and Friends podcast, co-starring 10-year NFL veteran and Super Bowl champion, Will Blackman.
Manning from the end zone. He throws, and a deflect away, and it is picked off by Will Blackman, the former Giant.
Tim Dwight watches it hit, bounces, picks it up at the 10, slips a defender, fumbles the football, it's up for grabs, it's covered in the end zone by Will Blackman for a Green Bay touchdown!
And now, here is your host,
Let's send it over to Ric Bucher.
Ric Bucher.
Welcome to another episode of Bucher and Blackman, subsidiary of Bucher and Friends, part of the United WeCast Network. I'm Ric Bucher. You can see me on FS1. You can read me on Bleacher Report. And you can follow me on Twitter at Ric Bucher. He is Will Blackman, NFL vet, Super Bowl champ. You can see him on NFL Network, and you can follow him on Twitter at Will Blackman. And we're also joined by a special guest, Dan Orlovsky, veteran, 13-year NFL quarterback, and now with ESPN as a NFL analyst. Dan, thank you so much. Is there any social media following that we can plug or any other element that you have out there that you'd like our listeners to know about?
What's going on? Good to be with you guys. No, I use Twitter to kind of interact with people. I think my handle is Dan Orlovsky 7. Tells you how much in tune I am to it. But I'll tell you one thing. Your guys' introductions are great, like Super Bowl champ.
Yeah.
Rick, you're all over everything. So it's good to be with you guys.
Well, thank you. Thank you. The reason that I wanted to have you on, and then Will...
You really wanted to have you on.
I did. We started talking about you yesterday. And then Will kind of like flossed a little bit to show that, Dan Orlovsky, you went like, and then he says, hold on just a second. And then he starts beep, 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 boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop.
He did not hear a dial tone, first of all.
I mean, that telephone sounds like it's from 1981.
Isn't that right? I know, my goodness.
Or like 2085.
There you go.
It was
Thank you.
A razor.
One of the other, but not from the present time. So what the hell was I talking about? But nonetheless, I heard you on ESPN radio on Saturday, and I was probably one of, 7 people who were listening on the weekend because everybody's tuned into either the Kentucky Derby or NBA playoffs. But you got into something that I think is not talked about enough, which is sort of the human element of guys having to make the leap in certain situations that I just don't think we take into account. And that's a young quarterback coming in and not just being able to play the game, but to be able to lead a locker room in the unique ways that a NFL quarterback has to, that I think is unique to the NFL, to the position, unlike even an NBA player or a Major League Baseball player coming in. I think it's just the demands are different. And there were questions that were in my head as I'm listening to the radio that I wish were follow-up questions that weren't happening. And so that's in part why I wanted to have you join us on the podcast, because for selfish reasons, I wanted to follow up on some of the things that you said. But as a precursor, you talked about specifically about a young quarterback coming in and having to be both one of the guys and yet also be a leader of the team. And explain what you mean by that and the challenge in that.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest way for me to put it is these great quarterbacks, the guys that we see perform great, also have this great ability to be 2 people at one time. They can be the guy, meaning they are the guy in that franchise. They are the leader. They are the CEO. They are the starting quarterback. They're one of, really 32 and really one of 15 or 12 if you're talking about the really good ones, and out of 7 billion people in the world. And those guys are very aware of that role, that pillar. And the guys that become great over 12, 15 years, they not only understand that they're the guy, but they're also a guy, meaning they are one of 53. They get everyone to believe that that person's role is as important as their role, and they can fit in with everybody. They can fit in with the 30-year-old who's at home. He's got 3 kids. He's married, and he's a homebody. He lives the home life, but he can relate to that guy. And then he could also relate to the guy who's 21 and newly drafted, or to the new into the city, and he wants to go and enjoy the city. And he's single, and he doesn't have those ties the quarterbacks that can be the guy and a guy consistently, those guys are the ones that match what they're able to do on the field talent-wise and become those quote-unquote franchise quarterbacks.
So Baker Mayfield's going to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I mean, it's those guys. I've been around two guys. I've been around 1,000 quarterbacks. I've been around two guys that were really, really great at it. Peyton Manning, and Peyton had this way where he had this way of understanding that he was the guy, and he made everyone understand that as well. Peyton had this way of walking around and just asking questions to no matter who you were, player, coach, whatever. He would ask you questions that he knew, you didn't know. But just to make sure that you knew, he knew. You know, like that was his way of going, I'm still the man. I'm still the quote-unquote sheriff. But also had that way of inviting you, hey, we're all going to get together, come to dinner. We're all going to go watch the movie. Let's go to dinner. We're all going to go grab a beer. Let's go together. And that was that way of him being the and. And then Matthew Stafford was like that too. Matthew Stafford had that great ability, still does, of being the guy and a guy.
Right. I've been very fortunate I got drafted to Green Bay, and we had Favre, okay? And then Favre left, and we had Aaron Rodgers. And then I go to New York, and we have Eli. And then I spent a couple of training camps in Seattle, and we had Russell. So I know exactly what you're talking about, Dan, in terms of the guy. It was just different. Literally was like a CEO.
Does Russell fit in that category?
Absolutely. Are you kidding me?
Well, I mean, of all the guys that you mentioned, Russell and Aaron would be the first guys that I would wonder, no question being the guy, being a guy would be my question with both of those two guys. And I guess I could see it with Aaron. Russell is so clean cut. He has such a clean cut image. If you're talking about the 21-year-old who wants to go out and have a few, that's the guy I see him having a hard time relating to.
But there's so many different ways you can relate to the 21-year-old. Like those quarterbacks that really do a good job of being a guy, they find it's almost like being married, Rick, and you got to go, okay, my wife, this X is important to my wife, so if it's important to her, it's important to me. And that's, such an impactful thing in your marriage. It's the same thing when it comes to relating to those guys that are maybe different than you or have different interests than you or lead a different life to you. Okay, what are the things that are important to you, and how do I make sure that it's important to me too? And so maybe it's not Russell going out and on the town with those guys, but relating to them, sharing that with them. Those guys, and it's funny, Will, that you mentioned those guys, because all those guys are really Hall of Famers and transcendent, franchise-changing guys. But it is
they're all Super Bowl champs.
And this is the point. It's hard. It's hard. The guys that are really good, more often than not, do one. Yeah. The guys that are great do both.
And is that something that you can develop, do you think? Or is it like you kind of have it coming in, and if you don't show it right away, it's because this is what I consider unique. You get an NBA star, he's a high draft pick, he's guaranteed money, he's got a leash. As I look at quarterbacks, it really is you make it or you don't. And if you don't in those first couple of years, you're labeled as being one or the other. And it's very rare that I see a guy come back from that. So I have an example. I didn't mean to cut you off, but when I was in Washington, we had Kirk Cousins, and stat wise, did everything he needed to do. What it was like, 4,500 yards and 25 TDs and 8 to 10 picks every year. Ideal, and did what he needed to do to get that contract. However, to Dan's point, like the guy or a guy, him relating to everyone, I feel like we really didn't know Kirk. Yeah.
Kirk came in, he did everything he was supposed to do. He was the first guy there, literally the first guy there, studied, did all his things, trained, ate right, practiced well, did all the things he needed to do. But I feel like we just didn't know him enough for him to get us where we needed to go.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. No doubt. I can't imagine, at 2021, and as you said, and this is what I appreciated what you were saying is you realize you're coming in at 21 and you got to be the guy of guys who are 29, 30 years old, who know the league better than you do, and have just just gone through life experiences that you haven't gone through. So,
and a difference. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, that's where I see the real challenge. The question I had for both of you is, so when teams are looking to draft a guy, how much do they consider that ability to be a guy and the guy, and how do you go about determining that?
Well, I'll tell you what Cleveland did really quick. So Alonzo Highsmith, one of the executives in the front office, he was actually, him and Dorsey and Elliott Wolf, they were all in Green Bay when I was there. They were part of the team that drafted me. So there's also a story saying that when Dorsey was when Alonzo was checking out Baker, the one thing that stood out is that Baker had like efficacy. He had the ability to affect everybody else.
Dan, did you hear that word?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's
Efficacy.
a Boston College private school education, man.
Yeah.
Stupid, bro.
Every once in a while, Will drops one of those on me.
Come on, man. I stopped reading as soon as I graduated college, so forget about it. And the ability to affect change. And one thing that stood out was when he went to his pro day, he did some like little chant to his teammates, and they all said it right back to him. And so for them, just to see how he was around everybody else, he lifted everyone's energy. He made everybody better just with his presence and just how he was with them, to Dan's point earlier in terms of being the guy. Yeah. That's why they felt like it was a clear-cut leader to pick Baker number one overall. And, I mean, a prime example is when he came in again after Tyrod went down, I mean, you should have seen just how they followed him right away for him to come back and win. So that's my example, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, to be honest with you, this has been a huge gripe of mine for years, is that really the most important thing a quarterback does is without the football. It's all this stuff that we're talking about, really, to get these guys to go, okay, are they going to be great, blah, blah, blah. It's more important they do without what they do without the football. And the NFL, because when it comes to the draft, people in the NFL draft like how people go grocery shopping. When you go check out at the grocery store, there's all these candy bars that are shiny at the checkout counter and whatnot. And we look at them and go, that's not good for me, but it looks good. And I know it's not good for me, but it looks good, and I'm still going to buy it. And we often draft quarterbacks like that. We draft quarterbacks because of what they look like, or we have for the past 10, 15, 20, 30 years, is like, I know that kid's not good for me. He's 6'5", and he's 230 pounds, and man, he looks good, but he can't lead, or he can't think, or he can't play, or he's selfish, or he doesn't galvanize people. And I know he's bad for me, but I'm still going to buy it because it looks good. And we've gotten away from that a little bit, with the Baker Mayfield pick and the Kyler Murray pick is, okay, we're not just drafting off what they look like. But it's a very difficult thing to measure. That's why, partly because we have some of the misses that we've had in the past as quarterbacks. Again, like a lot of guys can do one and they become good players, but to become the franchise-changing guys that we expect them to be when they're top 10 picks, I even said today myself, I was blown away that the Giants took Daniel Jones at 6, just because of, for me, I can only watch tape. I don't get to spend time with these guys. But when you're hearing people talk about Daniel Jones and him going, this kid can handle the New York market. This kid is a great teammate. He's got, I think we'll use that efficacy. He's got genuine, kind of a genuine personality to him. That is when you realize, like, all right, well, maybe the Giants measured something in him that a person like me or somebody else just can't find on tape.
Yeah. See, I wonder, because the examples of guys that look great in the team picture and they have the measurables and that you're going to win the press conference with them, like those guys I get. I wonder if there are teams, though, that do try to go in the direction of, we need the guy who can be the bonding glue, the guy who can be a guy and the guy at the same time, and will take a little bit less on the talent level and they lose out going that direction. I wonder, you're going to have swings and misses in both, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder how often teams go the other direction, and those are the ones that get panned because they don't understand what we've been talking about and what you brought up, which is they're looking for that guy that may have the more important or has demonstrated the more important ingredient than the cannon arm that can throw it 80 yards.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, and Will can vouch for this too, is a lot of times coaches think that they can make somebody something that they're not. And so you'll draft a guy going, this quarterback, he's really talented. We don't hear great things about him off the field, but we can work on that. Like we can get him to become a leader.
Right.
Or this guy's a really good leader, but you know what? He makes really bad decisions with the football in the red. But we can work on that. Like I'll fix that. And so again, I don't mean to dumb it down too much, but like that's why it is so stinking hard to find these guys. Yeah. And when you find them, that's why everyone in the NFL, don't pay your quarterback, just pay everybody else. And I'm like, wait, what? Like we've gone from this is the hardest position in the history of sports to find to going like, just pay anybody. And people don't understand like how hard it is to find a guy that can play, that can be both the guy and a guy and still good enough to play on the field. That's why you pay those guys that money.
Yeah.
Right. I couldn't imagine when Cam went to Carolina that who was the OC at the time? Was it Chudzinski? Was there for him to try to make him a true pocket passer and Cam never run?
Yeah.
They were smart. They were smart. Yeah, they were smart in regards where they took Cam Newton's playbook from Auburn. Like we drafted him because of what he did.
Right.
Just exactly what Baltimore's doing with Lamar Jackson. They're not going to have him sit back there in the pocket and go through entire reads.
And I want to get to that next because that was one of the other things, Dan, that I heard you bring up. But before we get to that, so what kind of quarterback were you? Well, I mean, in terms of like when you came in and you were in a couple different places, what was your evolution? Where were you in terms of the guy?
Dan should have went to the Pac-12. That's what he should. Well, Pac-10 at the time. That's what Dan should have went.
It's a great question. So in college, I was both. In college, I was the guy and a guy. And then when I got to the NFL, I still kind of thought that way. And I never had the opportunity to become that. Like my first year, I played very briefly in blowout games. Mm-hmm. My second, but the NFL, I say this all the time as well, like the NFL ruins most quarterbacks than they are made. And I'm not going to sit here and say I was ruined, but the NFL they'll snuff you out a little bit. And, because of me being a 5th-round pick and being in a bad situation in Detroit, like I do believe that I almost got like my moxie or my swagger or my I'm the guy coached out of me in a way. Because a lot of times it's like, listen, just don't turn the ball over and we'll play good defense and whatnot. And that gets coached into so many young guys. And so I lost that I'm the guy. I was a great guy. I was a great locker room guy. That was important to me. But I got the I'm the guy kind of coached out of me or politicked out of me, or it became a business out of me.
Right. You start looking at your value to the team as opposed to like you trying to be the man. Mm-hmm. I think that's what happened. That's what happened to me in my career. It was like, okay, I go to the Redskins. We get Josh Norman. We have Breland, who's going to be a free agent. And, I was a corner. And it was like, hey, Will, you have a lot of value. You can play corner if we need to. You can play nickel. You can play safety. You can play dime. You can play returner. You can do all these things. So as opposed to me mentally like, hey, I'm still trying to work to be this Pro Bowl corner. It's like, well, shoot. If I can play this position, then I can for real play another 4 years because of my value. Yeah. I started, like you said, becoming a businessman.
Yeah.
The sense that I get is that there's a decision made on you before you
as soon as you walk in the door.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Crazy. It's not they put you out there and they run you through a few things and they assess you once you're wearing their uniform. They're assessing you at the combine. They're assessing you off your tape. When you actually sign on the dotted line, they already in their mind have kind of your ceiling and your basement structured in their mind. Is that fair to say? I mean, was that your experience?
Oh, I would say absolutely. You get pegged very quickly in the NFL. And I want to be honest and transparent as well. I was a backup quarterback. That's what in the NFL. And a lot of people, like sometimes on Twitter or whatnot, like people will say to me like, hey, Dan, why didn't you make it? And my thing is always like, not in like I got offended way, but I'm like, I was one of the top 60 people in the world.
Dude, exactly.
Years.
You made it.
Yeah.
You made it.
Like,
you made it for 13 years? Dude, you got paid to play your sport. So, you freaking made it.
But they kind of a lot of it depends on the organization and the coaches and whatnot, but you certainly will get labeled and pegged as, okay, this guy is this. And, again, I don't know if an organization got me wrong. An organization saw me as a backup quarterback, and that's what I was. But I'm sure they miss on some other situations as well.
Right. All right. One of the other things that I wanted to get into that you talked about was and again, it's something that you kind of know, but you put it in terms that really brought it home, which is the complexity of an NFL playbook, and that as a quarterback, again, and I think some of this is the dynamic of we have these guys, the old school was you were going to sit for a year or two before you played, and which would give you time to learn the playbook and to see it in practice and to kind of absorb it and whatever the best way was for you to learn it. Now it's like, the clock's ticking as soon as you freaking put the pads on. So explain again, the way you described what it's like to get an NFL playbook for a guy coming straight out of college and gets his first playbook. And let's say you're a Deshaun Watson and you're suddenly going to be playing, or Russell Wilson, especially let's say a Russell Wilson, you're coming out of training camp. What's that like for him to absorb that playbook, regardless of where he played in college?
Yeah, so my analogy is always everyone goes, well, it's like learning a new language. And sure, that makes a lot of sense. But with quarterback, it's not about just learning a new language. It's like taking somebody who, all right, Will and I were born in New England, right? So we are, we're Americans and we only know English. At least I do, okay? So I've only spoken English my whole life. Now imagine taking me and dropping me in the middle of Japan, and I have to speak Japanese right now for me to function in my life. It's not only me learning a new language, I have to own that language and master that language right now, or I'm going to be in a really bad place in my life. Like I can't function every day if I don't do that. And not only do I need to learn that right now, I need to forget the English because that doesn't help me anymore. And so that's what it's like when you go to the NFL as a quarterback. It's not just learning a new language. It is completely understanding and being able to communicate that new language in a very short period of time and forgetting your old language. And that's the challenge that these guys have. It's not just learning it. It is being able, and think about that. Like if you took a person who only knows English and dropped them in a foreign-speaking country and they don't have any understanding of that language and going, all right, later, like, good luck.
Okay, so
that's what playing quarterback is like.
So there's getting dropped in, say, a Spanish.
You at least took like one Japanese class. You've had to take one before you went to Japan.
I failed Spanish. Dude, I failed Spanish 3 years in a row in high school.
Well, I was just gonna say
that's because you couldn't get that New England accent, right? You kept saying traba ha.
But there's being dropped into a Spanish speaking country, and then there's being dropped into like Russia or an Arabian country, like where it's none of it makes it does. There's no correlation. I got to think there's at least a little bit of correlation. There's you're recognizing certain things, right? Or no?
No, because I mean, a perfect example. I just spoke with Matthew Stafford, who's going into I think is his 10th or 11th year, and he's learning new ways to call basic defenses that he's seen 1,000 times in the NFL because his offensive coordinator knows an under front, meaning, hey, the nose tackle's shaded on the center, and then to the strong side, there's a 3 technique, meaning the defensive lineman's on the guard, and then there's a 5 technique, meaning there's a guy on like the tackle at the center. Matthews always called that under front. Now he's got to call it a 25 front because so like you're getting a veteran quarterback having to learn different ways to call something he's called something his whole life. And so imagine a rookie quarterback, because again, coaches have certain ways to call plays, and they also have certain ways to coach plays. So your play where it's a shallow cross and a 10-yard in route might be called
a high
drive, and then it might be called bingo cross, and then it might be called drive, and then it might be called
high low,
and then it might be called level. It just again, and so you're forgetting old and learning new, and that's why I try to use that language analogy. It's like, hey, there you go, and by the way, you can't just know this on paper. You have to know this when you're going to get punched in the mouth 65 times by a 300-pounder.
Right.
And by the way, you better be perfect at it.
Yeah.
Oh, even worse, you got a running back behind you who's learning the language too, asking you, what does this mean again? So I've been in a similar situation. So I go to Green Bay, and I have Bob Sanders as my coordinator, and we played press quarters the whole time. Then I go to New York. We did not play press quarters. We play a lot of 3, a lot of 2, a couple of nickel blitzes. Then I go to Seattle, and it's man in cover 3, bail, no pressing. Well, a little bit of press. So fortunately for that, I go to Jacksonville. It's the same defense because Gus Bradley was in Seattle. Then I go to Redskins, completely different defense there. Another coordinator with Joe Barry. And then I had my cup of coffee literally in another country in Canada. Oh, yo.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was a whole different ball game. So I feel you on that. So right now it's like you can throw any defense at me and I can run it.
So
fluent.
Share a story with you about, you guys remember the old coach Larry Brown, right? NBA coach?
Sure. Yeah.
So he used to change his playbook throughout the course of the year. And they'd have the same names for the plays, but the plays would be completely different.
In Philly, he did this?
He did it in Indiana.
Okay.
Because the story is,
what was the thought process?
there was a point where just because teams scout and you call out a play and they think it's going to be one thing, and now it ends up being something else, and so he liked changing it up to screw with the other team. And so they were in a playoff game at one point, and he says, "Okay, let's run 2." So they break. They're walking, and Reggie goes, "Is that the old 2 or the new 2 or the old 2?"
Yeah.
Like he had 3 different ones, and he said, and it was the old 2. It was like it wasn't even the most current version of it or whatever. He was having a memory lapse.
First of all, how was he coaching basketball in Italy then? That's literally another language.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, over there, that's where we're lazy Americans, because most of them
you get a translator, right?
Yeah, and most of them can speak English. Like, I always feel bad about that. Like, so many people who English is their second language, and we just assume we travel the globe and we just expect people to speak our language, even though we're in their country. But I'm getting a soapbox here. Oh, for you, Will. So defensively, kind of circling back to the whole a guy, the guy thing, do you have the same thing on that side of the ball? I would think it's a little less pronounced, but I would think that there's still somebody who has to be the guy and a guy to bring it all together on the defensive side.
Well, yeah, I think it's just like the general consensus, like just watching film, just who's like legit, But yeah, as a defense, there's guys that you are worried about, and there's guys where you're like, I'm not concerned at all. We know when we have to line up and we see Aaron Rodgers over there, he can win or lose the game for them. We know that with just one throw, roll to his left and do whatever he wants, which is really uncharacteristic. I'll bring up Cam. If Cam is not running the ball, and I feel like if he's sitting there and got to pat the ball and go through his reads, I think we're going to be fine. It's little things like that where we just know. Same thing, Russell, he can win the game however he wants to win it. I want to go back to where I was with like Favre. He was the type of quarterback we knew as a defense that we're never going to be out of the game, no matter what. And that's kind of when I learned that young. I learned that early in my career, and I was like, man, that's what you have. So I've been around, like I said, with Aaron. I never felt like we were out of a game. I felt like some way, somehow, if we were down by 15, that he was going to figure it out because he was the guy. I had playoff Eli, and I knew somehow he would figure it out because he was in a different way. He was the guy.
Interesting.
So.
The other element I wanted to ask you, Dan, is when you are, and we'll wrap up with this, when you're watching a quarterback play, can you tell when he's struggling with the language versus he's struggling with the read? Do you know if I'm presenting that correctly? There's times where I see guys and I can tell that they don't see the field as well as somebody else, but sometimes I don't know how much of that is they're already crossed up because they're not comfortable enough with the language of what they just gave in the huddle versus what they're seeing in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, more often, if a guy is struggling with the language, that is going to be something that's obvious at all times. I mean, it's going to be obvious him sitting under center or in the shotgun. You could just watch a guy. It's almost like I'm trying to, kind of correlate it or analogize it to a way where it would make some sense to people. It's almost like if you're watching, whether it's real life or a movie, like a guy go talk to a girl. You can tell by the guy's walk or heading over there if he's feeling good or not, like if he's confident in what's about to be said by him or whatnot. And you can tell when a guy probably doesn't have a chance. Yeah. That's what it's like when you're watching quarterbacks. You can tell pre-snap, how just their comfort in their posture, where their eyes are going, the inflection of their voice. Like you can tell if a guy's comfortable with the language. The read stuff usually happens. Here's the thing that gets lost a little bit. Quarterbacks get fooled on reads. Not often, but they get fooled on reads because some defenses are just good. The reality is, and this is what gets lost on some people, most quarterbacks don't make a lot of bad reads. What happens is, because of pressure, they panic and make the read. The read is forced to be made sooner than they want. And so sometimes it's a guess. The read is a guess because of that pressure. That's why the greatest attribute for a quarterback is what you do under panic. Right. And so I don't think there's a lot of points to or a lot of moments where you go, man, this guy just is not making the right read. Most starting quarterbacks make it right. It's just doing it on a consistent basis. But I would say more understanding pre-snap and then what they do in panic, because panic is more the reality than non-panic.
That makes...
No, it does, because watching, I remember before the Patriot game, for the Super Bowl, Rams and Patriots, the Bears game versus the Rams, they went after Goff, and it was just a massacre.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, Belichick's going to watch that tape, and it's over for the Rams.
All right, so I'm not springing. I hope I'm not springing this on you, but it just crossed my mind because I think one of the Twitter beefs that you had was actually with Jeff Schwartz, if I'm not mistaken.
Me?
Yes. Am I correct on this? And over Josh Rosen.
No. It wasn't with Jeff. It was with, I believe, Omar Kelly, maybe.
Okay. But it was...
Usually, because Jeff and I are close, so I try not to call him out on the stupid stuff he says. I'm just joking. What was it about? What do you got?
It was, it was about how Josh, if I'm not mistaken, how Josh was handling the Kyler Murray drafting. Am I wrong on this?
Okay.
And I felt like...
No, Jeff...
You were in the camp, you were in the more of the Steve Smith camp of, hey, it's competition. Like, dude, like just man up and accept.
I was in the complete opposite camp.
Okay.
I thought what Steve Smith, and all due respect to Steve, I thought what Steve said was a bunch of misled baloney. I was actually Will called me about it.
Okay.
I was on the beach in Maui, and I was like, I gotta call somebody. I'm calling Dan. I have to vent.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought, like, I actually thought that Josh handled the situation incredibly well, and it's so kind of short-sighted to be like, oh, man up and just compete.
Yeah.
The kid did that. Like, he did that, and I thought he handled the whole situation incredibly well. But it's not as simple as like he didn't whine. Never once did he whine. He actually did the exact opposite. So,
yeah, okay. Well, we're in the same camp, and I was mistaken. It must have been something. You and Jeff got into something. I remembered it.
They're like brothers. They always bicker, but they love each other.
Yeah. And I knew it was good spirited, which is why I brought it up. If it was really heated, I don't
remember what it was. Maybe he overvalues guard play more than I do, or something.
Oh, well, that's for 100% sure. I mean,
yeah,
there's no one values guard play more than Jeff Schwartz.
Yeah. Just really good offensive line. All right, great.
Yeah, Dan. Thank you so much for taking the time. This was a real pleasure, and keep up the great work. I really enjoy your work. Sincerely,
thank you, man.
I think you talk about the right stuff.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. You guys are great.
All right. Well, maybe when I figure out what it was what the beef was, maybe we'll bring you back on and we can talk about that.
Well, the great thing about social media is I'm sure someone was going to remind you about it very quickly, and then kind of inject their own belief into it, and then tell somebody how stupid they are and all that stuff. So.
Yep, exactly. All right. Well, hey, listen, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yep.
And that's it for Bucher and Blackman, subsidiary of Bucher and Friends, part of the United WeCast Network. Remember, please rate the show wherever you get your podcast, iTunes or wherever. And then if you want us to do something for you, screenshot the review. If it's just the stars, that's fine. And we will make you eligible for some prizes. All right, that does it. For Will, for myself, in the next podcast, I'll be joined by Adam Zagoria. He is covering the college basketball corruption case for the New York Times in New York about Sean Miller and the University of Arizona. And we talked about why nobody cares about all of that and more. In the meantime, as always, thanks for listening.